Step back into the 1970s and explore the resourceful grocery list that fueled Black families when budgets were tight. This wasn't just about saving money. It was a testament to culinary ingenuity and pride, turning overlooked cuts like neck bones and ham hocks into rich, flavorful essentials and stretching every dollar with staples like powdered milk and bulk bags of cornmeal. From the resourcefulness of day-old bread to the reliability of government commodity cheese, these 20 items tell a powerful story of survival, tradition, and the deep, satisfying flavor that grandmothers knew how to pull from the simplest ingredients: neck bones. Families knew that the meat counter held treasures that others overlooked. Neck bones, bony, humble cuts from pork or beef, cost pennies per pound, dismissed by those who could afford prime cuts. But in Black kitchens, these bones became the foundation of meals that could feed a household for days. The preparation was an art form passed down through generations. Grandmothers slow-cooked neck bones with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until the meat fell tender from the bone. The resulting broth was liquid gold, thick with flavor and collagen. That broth became the base for rice, beans, or greens. Every fragment of meat was precious, picked clean and savored. Neck bones taught that value was not determined by price tag. They taught patience. Good food took time, and shortcuts produced inferior results. The family gathered around neck bones understood that dignity existed in every meal, that resourcefulness was a form of genius, and that the best cooks knew how to coax abundance from scarcity. Those bones, simmered with love and skill, became testimony to the alchemy of Black cooking traditions. 2. Dried navy beans. In every pantry, bags of dried navy beans sat waiting. Small, white, and dense with potential, these beans cost almost nothing, lasted indefinitely, and could stretch to feed unexpected guests. They were insurance against hunger, quiet soldiers in the battle against empty stomachs. Mothers soaked beans overnight, transforming hard pellets into swollen pearls ready for cooking. The next day, those beans simmered for hours with ham hocks, onions, and peppers, filling the house with an aroma that promised comfort. Served over rice or with cornbread, navy beans became a complete meal: protein, fiber, and satisfaction in a single bowl. Navy beans taught planning and foresight. They taught that the cheapest ingredients, given time and technique, could rival expensive dishes in flavor and nutrition. The family eating navy beans was not suffering. They were celebrating ancestral wisdom, connecting to generations who had always known that beans were wealth you could store on a shelf. Those beans represented survival transformed into sustenance, poverty transformed into pride. 3. Chicken backs and necks. While others purchased chicken breasts and thighs, Black families headed straight for the backs and necks, the parts butchers sold in bulk bags for pocket change. These bony pieces seemed like scraps, but experienced cooks knew better. They held concentrated flavor and enough meat to matter when every penny counted. Chicken backs and necks were destined for the stock pot or the frying pan. Fried, they became crispy treats, the skin crackling with seasoning, small bits of dark meat clinging to bones that children learned to navigate expertly. Boiled, they created stock so rich it needed little else to become soup. Nothing was wasted. Even the bones went to neighbors' dogs or into gardens as fertilizer. These humble cuts taught respect for the whole animal, and the importance of using everything. They taught that waste was a luxury Black families could not afford and did not desire. The chicken back, dismissed by the mainstream, became a symbol of culinary intelligence. It proved that knowing how to cook mattered more than having expensive ingredients. Those backs and necks, handled with skill, fed families with dignity and flavor that expensive cuts could not surpass. 4. Fatback. Wrapped in white butcher paper, slabs of fatback, pure pork fat with streaks of meat, sat in refrigerators and freezers, ready to transform any dish. This was not cooking oil from a bottle. This was flavor in solid form, rendered slowly to produce grease that made everything better. Cooks cut fatback into chunks, rendering it in cast iron skillets until the fat melted and the remaining pieces turned into cracklings. Crispy, salty, addictive. That rendered fat became the medium for frying chicken, cooking eggs, seasoning vegetables, and creating the foundation of gravy. A little fatback went a long way, making a pound last weeks. Fatback taught the principle of flavor concentration. It taught that fat was not the enemy, but the vehicle for making affordable food taste extraordinary. The family that cooked with fatback understood traditional food ways, understood that their ancestors had developed these techniques for reasons deeper than preference. This was survival cuisine, elevated to art. That slab of fatback represented connection to history, to people who had made much from little and passed down the knowledge to keep their descendants strong. 5. Grits, in bulk. 5-pound bags of grits were a staple, never allowed to run out. These ground corn kernels cost almost nothing and could appear at any meal, breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Grits were versatility incarnate, a blank canvas for whatever flavors the cook chose to add. Morning grits came with butter and salt, sometimes sugar, sometimes cheese. Evening grits might be served alongside fried fish or smothered in gravy with onions. Shrimp and grits was reserved for special occasions, but plain grits with eggs fed families every ordinary Tuesday. The preparation was simple: boiling water, steady stirring, patience while they thickened to creamy perfection. Grits taught comfort and adaptability. They taught that simple food, prepared with care, could anchor a meal and satisfy hunger complete. The family eating grits was connected to Southern agricultural traditions, to indigenous knowledge passed through African hands, to a food that had sustained people through slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and beyond. That bag of grits was more than grit. It was continuity, heritage, and the promise that no one would go hungry as long as corn could be ground and water could boil. 6. Pig feet, pickled or fresh. Pig feet occupied a special place in black grocery lists. These gelatinous extremities cost next to nothing, missed by those who did not know their potential, but in skilled hands, pig feet became delicacies, tender, flavorful, and satisfying in ways that transcended their humble appearance. Fresh pig feet were cleaned meticulously, then slow-cooked for hours until the meat and skin achieved melt-in-your-mouth texture. Pickled pig feet came in jars, vinegar-soaked and ready to eat, a snack, a side dish, or a protein boost when money was too tight for anything else. Children watched adults expertly navigate the bones, extracting every morsel. Pig feet taught that beauty standards applied to food were often rooted in class and prejudice rather than actual quality. They taught that foods dismissed by the dominant culture often held the deepest flavors and the richest traditions. The family eating pig feet was not desperate. They were culturally grounded, honoring ingredients that connected them to West African cuisine and centuries of black culinary ingenuity. Those pig feet represented resistance against assimilation, proof that you did not need to abandon your food ways to prove your worth. 7. Cornmeal. The yellow bag of cornmeal sat beside the flour, equally essential. This ground corn became cornbread, hush puppies, fish batter, and hot water cornbread, crispy golden discs fried quickly when bread had run out and payday was days away. Cornmeal was emergency rations and everyday staple simultaneously. Cornbread baked in cast iron skillets came out with crispy edges and tender centers, perfect for soaking up pot liquor or crumbling into buttermilk. Hush puppies, seasoned cornmeal batter dropped into hot oil, accompanied fish fries. Hot water cornbread required only cornmeal, water, and grease, transforming into impromptu in minutes. Cornmeal was never fancy, but it was always there. Cornmeal taught reliability and tradition. It connected families to the agricultural South, to Native American influences, to African cooking techniques adapted to American ingredients. The family that always had cornmeal was prepared for any circumstance. That bag represented security, the knowledge that even in the leanest times, bread could be made. Cornmeal was humble, but it was mighty, a golden powder that transformed into golden sustenance, filling bellies and honoring history with every batch. Canned mackerel, stacked in pantries, cans of mackerel offered affordable protein that lasted indefinitely. This fish was not fresh salmon or tuna. It was oily, strong-flavored, and required a specific palate and preparation method. But for families stretching dollars, canned mackerel was treasure. Mackerel was fried into crispy patties, mixed with cornmeal and onions, or cooked with tomatoes and served over rice. Some ate it straight from the can. Bones and all those soft bones provided calcium, nothing wasted. The distinct flavor was assertive, but seasoning and technique made it delicious. Children learned to appreciate it, understanding that preference was a luxury. Canned mackerel taught acceptance and adaptability. It taught that survival sometimes meant eating foods that were not your favorite, but doing so with gratitude and creativity. The family that turned canned mackerel into satisfying meals demonstrated culinary skill and mental resilience. Those cans represented preparedness and pragmatism. They proved that shelf-stable protein could sustain families through weeks when fresh meat was unaffordable. Mackerel was not glamorous, but it was sustaining, and that was what mattered most. White rice, 25 lb bags. The enormous bag of white rice sat in the pantry corner, lasting months and serving as the foundation for countless meals. Rice was cheap, filling and versatile, a vehicle for sauces, gravies and stews that transformed it from bland to extraordinary. Families bought the biggest bags available because rice never went bad and always got used. Rice appeared at nearly every dinner, under smothered chicken, alongside red beans, beneath gumbo, mixed with butter and sugar for a quick dessert. It stretched expensive ingredients, turning one pork chop's worth of gravy into a meal for four. The rice cooker or pot stayed in constant rotation, steam rising as another batch prepared. White rice taught the principle of foundation building. It taught that staple foods created the structure upon which flavor and nutrition were built. The family less a bag of rice was secure, knowing that hunger could always be addressed. That massive bag represented foresight and economic wisdom. Buying in bulk saved money, and rice was the ultimate bulk purchase. It was not exciting on its own, but it was essential, the reliable base that made everything else possible. Oxtails before oxtails became expensive delicacies in unsickle restaurants. They were affordable cuts purchased by black families who understood their value. These bony, gelatinous segments of tail required long cooking but rewarded patience, with fall-off-the-bone tenderness, and gravy so rich it was impossible. Oxtails were browned first, then braised for hours with onions, garlic, peppers and tomato. The resulting dish was transcendent, meat so tender it melted, gravy so thick and flavorful it needed nothing but rice or bread to complete the meal. 1 pound of oxtails cooked properly could feed a family of 6 because the gravy and rice did the stretch. Oxtails taught that time was an ingredient as valuable as any spice. They taught that cheap cuts could outshine expensive ones if you knew how to handle them. The family eating oxtails was connected to Caribbean influences, to African cooking traditions, to a global black diaspora that recognized the same cuts and heard them with similar love. Those oxtails represented culinary sophistication hidden in humble package, proof that the best food was not always the most expensive. It was the food prepared with knowledge and care. Part 1. Outro. And that's the first 10 groceries black families relied on when money was tight back in the 70s. If you grew up eating any of these, or if your family had their own budget-friendly staples, I'd love to hear your memories in the comments. What foods do you think should make it into part 2? Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next video, because we're just getting started, and part 2 is going to bring even more nostalgic essentials from a time when every dollar had to stretch. See, government cheese. The orange block arrived in a plain cardboard box distributed through commodity programs to families on assistance. Government cheese was not gourmet, it was dense, salty and almost impossibly orange, but it melted beautifully and tasted like salvation when the fridge was used. That cheese became grilled cheese sandwiches on white bread, macaroni and cheese that bubbled golden in the oven, cheese grits that stuck to your ribs, and cheese sauce poured over vegetables to make them more appealing to children. A single block lasted weeks because you only needed a little. It was concentrated flavor, pure dairy fat, that transformed plain food into something special. Government cheese taught humility and gratitude. It taught that help was not shameful, that systems existed to keep people fed, and that accepting assistance was survival, not failure. The family eating government cheese understood that circumstances were temporary, that struggle did not define worth, and that even free cheese could be cooked with pride. That orange block represented a safety net. It was the difference between hunger and fullness, between despair and hope, and it tasted like both. 12. Powdered milk. The canister of powdered milk sat on the shelf, waiting to be reconstituted with water. This was not fresh milk from the dairy case. This was survival milk, shelf-stable, inexpensive, and always available when money ran out before the month did. Mothers mixed powdered milk with water following the instructions, trying to get the ratio right so it didn't taste too watery or too thick. Sometimes they added vanilla or sugar to make it more palatable. Children complained, but they drank because milk was milk, and growing bodies needed calcium. Powdered milk went into cornbread batter pancake mix,
mashed potatoes and macaroni and cheese. It stretched recipes, allowing families to bake and cook when fresh milk was unaffordable. Powdered milk taught resourcefulness and adaptation. It taught that preferences were luxuries, and needs came first. The family drinking powdered milk was making do, making it work, making sure that children had something white and nutritious to pour over cereal even when money was tight. That canister represented pragmatism. It was not what you wanted, but it was what you needed, and that was enough. 13. Spam. The rectangular can with the pull-tab key sat in the pantry, a backup plan made of processed pork. Spam was not fancy meat. It was salt, fat and protein pressed into a gelatinous loaf, but it was cheap. It lasted forever and it could be fried, baked or eaten cold. Sliced thin and fried crispy, Spam became breakfast meat alongside eggs and grit. Cubed and mixed with beans or rice, it added protein to otherwise meatless meals. Some ate it straight from the can, sliced thick on white bread with mustard. The taste was salty, the texture was strange, but hunger made it delicious. Spam taught that survival sometimes meant eating things that were more function than flavor. It taught that protein was protein, and calories were calories when you needed them. The family eating Spam was not ashamed. They were fed. They were resourceful. They were making a way out of no way, turning a can of processed meat into sustenance that kept bodies strong and bellies full. That blue and yellow can represented preparedness. It was insurance against hunger, proof that even in the worst times, there was always something to eat. Pinto beans. Next to the navy beans, sat bags of pinto beans, speckled, earthy, and endlessly useful. These beans were the backbone of southern and southwestern cuisine, absorbing whatever flavors you added, and stretching a single ham hock into a meal. For pinto beans, soaked overnight, then simmered for hours with onions, garlic and a piece of fatback or ham hock until they turned creamy and rich, served over rice or with cornbread. They became comfort food that filled you completely. Some mashed them into refried beans, frying them with lard until they developed a crust. Others left them whole, soupy, perfect for sopping with bread. Pinto beans taught patience and planning. They taught that the best food required time, that beans cooked slow were beans cooked right. The family eating pinto beans was connected to Mexican influences, to Native American traditions, to a food that had crossed borders and cultures to become essential everywhere it landed. That bag of pinto beans represented security. It was the knowledge that as long as you had beans, rice and something to season them with, no one would go hungry. 15. Liver. The meat counter held one more affordable treasure: beef liver or chicken liver. Sold cheap because most people found it too strong, too metallic, too much. But black cooks knew how to handle liver, knew how to soak it in milk to mellow the flavor, knew how to fry it with onions, until it became tender and savory. Beef liver was sliced thin, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried in a hot skillet with onions that caramelized to sweetness. The iron-rich meat provided nutrients that growing children needed, even if those children wrinkled their noses at the sight of it. Chicken livers were smaller, more tender, often fried crispy and eaten whole or chopped into gravy. Liver taught that nutrition sometimes trumped preference. It taught that strong flavors could be managed with technique, that iron and protein mattered more than taste when bodies needed strengthening. The family eating liver was pragmatic. They understood that the cheapest meat at the counter was often the most nutritious, that organs held vitamins that muscle meat lacked. That package of liver represented wisdom. It was understanding that food was medicine, that building strong bodies required more than just filling stomachs. 16. Saltine crackers. The long rectangular box of saltine crackers sat in every cupboard, never empty. These plain square crackers were cheap, versatile and essential for stretching meals and soothing sick stomachs. Saltines were crushed and used as breading for fried fish or chicken. They were crumbled into soup to add body and substance. They were spread with butter or peanut butter for snacks. They were eaten with canned sardines or mackerel, the blandness balancing the fish's saltiness. When children got sick, saltines and ginger ale were the cure. When money ran out, saltines with cheese became dinner. Saltines taught versatility and reliability. They taught that the plainest foods often had the most uses. The family that always had saltines was prepared for illness, for hunger, for the unexpected guest who needed something to eat. Those crackers stretched meals, filled gaps, and provided comfort in their very plainness. That box represented stability. It was knowing that no matter what, there was always something to eat, even if it was just crackers and water. 7. Canned tomatoes. Rows of canned tomatoes lined pantry shelves, whole, diced, crushed, paste. These preserved tomatoes were the foundation of countless dishes, adding acidity, sweetness, and body to everything they touched. Canned tomatoes became spaghetti sauce when mixed with ground beef and seasonings. They became gumbo base, chili foundation, stew liquid. They were cooked with okra, added to beans, simmered with chicken. A single can could transform plain rice into Spanish rice, plain ground beef into something resembling meat sauce. Canned tomatoes taught the principle of transformation. They taught that a few shelf-stable ingredients could create the illusion of abundance, that acid and sweetness could make cheap cuts of meat taste expensive. The family cooking with canned tomatoes was connected to Italian influences, to Mediterranean traditions adapted to American pantry. Those cans represented the immigrant experience meeting the Black American experience, creating fusion cuisine born of necessity. That stack of canned tomatoes meant possibility. It meant that dinner could always be made, that flavor could always be found, that cooking was less about fresh ingredients, and more about knowing what to do with what you had. 8. Vienna sausages. The small cans with the pull tab open to reveal tiny sausages swimming in gelatin, processed, salty and oddly appealing to children who didn't know any better. Vienna sausages were not real meat in any traditional sense, but they were protein. They were cheap, and they never went bad. Children ate them cold straight from the can, fingers sticky with the gelatin. Adults fried them as eggs or added them to beans for extra flavor. Some cut them up and put them in macaroni and cheese. The taste was salty and slightly sweet, the texture was soft, and the whole experience was more about function than flavor. Vienna sausages taught that sometimes food was just fuel. They taught that children would eat almost anything if it came in a small can and felt like a treat. The family buying Vienna sausages was stretching protein sources, making meat available even when fresh meat was. Those little cans were lunchbox fillers, quick snacks, emergency proteins when cooking seemed impossible. That blue can represented convenience. It was ready-to-eat protein that required no preparation, no cooking, no effort. Enter opening the lid.
Bologna, the 1-pound cylinder of bologna, wrapped in red plastic, sat in every refrigerator. This processed meat was cheap, lasted days, and could be eaten cold or fried. Bologna was not fancy, it was not healthy, but it was reliable. Sliced thin, bologna became sandwiches. White bread, mustard, maybe a slice of cheese if you were lucky. Sliced thick and fried, it became breakfast meat, the edges curling up crispy while the center stayed tender. Some kids ate bologna raw, rolling it up and eating it like a cigar. Others insisted it had to be fried until the edges were almost burnt. Bologna taught that processed food had its place. It taught that when you were feeding multiple children on a tight budget, fancy meats were not an option. The family eating bologna was making lunch happen, making breakfast possible, making protein available even when money was gone. That red-wrapped cylinder represented accessibility. It was meat that anyone could afford, that lasted in the fridge, that children would actually eat without complaint. Day-old bread. At the bakery or grocery store, a rack in the back held bread marked down because it was a day old. Sometimes two. The discount was significant, 50% off, sometimes more, and bread that was a day old was still perfectly good, especially if you were going to toast it or make French toast or bread pudding. Families bought multiple loaves of day-old bread, storing them in the freezer for later. That bread became toast for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, bread pudding when it got too stale to eat plain. Nothing was wasted. Ends and crusts were saved for stuffing or breadcrumbs, moldy spots were cut away, and the rest was used. Day-old bread taught that freshness was negotiable. It taught that food didn't have to be perfect to be good, that slight staleness was easily fixed with a toaster or a skillet. The family buying day-old bread was smart, was strategic, was refusing to pay full price for something that would taste exactly the same. That marked-down loaf represented wisdom. It was understanding that value and quality were not the same thing, that a day-old loaf was still a loaf, and that pride had nothing to do with when the bread was baked. Conclusion. These 20 groceries tell a story that goes beyond food. They tell a story of survival, ingenuity, and unbreakable spirit. Black families in the 1970s didn't just make do with less, they made magic with less. They turned neckbones into feasts, powdered milk into nourishment, and day-old bread into comfort. Every item on this list represents a choice, not to give up, not to go hungry, not to let poverty steal dignity. These groceries were teachers. They taught patience, planning, creativity, and respect for every crumb. They taught that wealth isn't measured in what you have, but in what you do with it. And they taught that a family that eats together, no matter what's on the plate, is a family that survives together. So the next time you see oxtails on a menu for $30 or government cheese mentioned in a joke, remember, these foods fed generations. They built strong bodies and stronger spirits. They weren't just groceries, they were love, measured in pounds and cans and bags. They were history, purchased one tight dollar at a time. And they were proof that you can't break a people who know how to turn nothing into everything.